Who are the best quarterbacks in the SEC heading into 2025? Locked On SEC starts right now.
You are Locked On SEC, your daily podcast on the Southeastern Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On SEC. It's great to have you guys along. I'm Chris Gordy. Thanks for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. All right, we head into the offseason officially of college football after Ohio State won the national championship the other night, and we start to turn the page and look ahead to some of the big topics as we head into 2025. And, of course, a lot of different outlets out there. On3 has got some posts. ESPN's put out their way too early top 25. And our friends at FanDuel, of course, one of our sponsors here on the podcast, they've put out some interesting odds and graphics. So I figured we would kind of start with some of these posts, and we'll bring them back to the SEC. But first off, I want to start with this one that they posted. Way too early top 10 quarterbacks in college football next season. And if you think about it, we're losing several quarterbacks. We're losing, Shedeur Sanders will leave Colorado, head to the draft. Cam Ward at Miami, heading to the draft. Quinn Ewers at Texas, moving on. But we've got some big-name guys coming back. Of course, Carson Beck is coming back, not at Georgia, but coming to Miami. But in the SEC, you have several returning starters, including Garrett Nussmeier at LSU, Taylon Green at Arkansas, who I feel like not enough people are talking about. But let's take a look at their top 25 over at FanDuel. And this is what they have. They have Garrett Nussmeier ranked number 1 at LSU. And makes a lot of sense. One of the most experienced quarterbacks in all of college football returning next year. Just threw for 4,000 passing yards, 32 total touchdowns last year at LSU. Had a really nice season. The big thing to watch for Nussmeier here at LSU in 2025 is, does he take that big year 2 leap at LSU? We saw, the last 2 Heisman Trophy winners at LSU took that major leap. Joe Burrow, again, we think of Joe Burrow now in the sense of how incredible he is and what a legend he's become or became at LSU and then in the NFL. But Joe Burrow in 2018 was very just kind of okay. It was a good year, but it wasn't great. 19, he came back and made that huge monster leap. Same thing with Jaden Daniels. His first year at LSU after transferring over from Arizona State was very good. His mobility, his running ability and all that. But it was the throwing ability that took a huge leap from his year 1 at LSU to year 2. I remember the big gripe on Jaden Daniels after year 1 was, man, he doesn't throw the deep ball very much or very well. Well, when he came back that next year, he improved on that, and he threw the ball very well down the field, and that's how Brian Thomas Jr. and Malik Neighbors both became first-round picks. If Garrett Nussmeier can make that big leap from last year to this year at LSU, he will have himself in the Heisman conversation as well as LSU in the national championship conversation, or at least the playoff conversation. But that, and look, the pressure on Brian Kelly, he's almost got to make that leap this year. So we'll see. But again, can't argue with Garrett Nussmeier being number 1 on the list. Now, here's where it gets tricky. They've got Arch Manning from Texas at number 2. This is certainly a, betting on the potential kind of thing, right? Like this is when we talk about ranking quarterbacks of the offseason, this is where it gets tough because you got Quinn Ewers or Garrett Nussmeier, who has all the skins on the wall because he did it, and Arch Manning, who's got all the potential in the world. Arch Manning last year threw for just 900 passing yards, 100 rushing yards, 9 passing touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns. Those are pretty gaudy numbers for the small sample size he played, right? When Quinn Ewers was injured for a game, and then, when Arch kind of came in and mop-up duty and all that, but 1,000 total yards, 9 passing, 4 rushing touchdowns, pretty significant for a guy who was a backup. But after Arch Manning, we look back at the rest of the list. DJ Lagway at number 3. Again, another on potential. What do you think DJ Lagway is going to be? I think I brought this up on the show, but somebody I talked to at the Cotton Bowl, was a national person, was telling me, look, Arch Manning is going to get all the hype of being the future, number 1 overall draft pick. But DJ Lagway is a guy that, is obviously he is definitely going to be in the conversation for a future number 1 draft pick. Now, they're different years, right? If Arch has an awesome year at Texas, he will be a redshirt sophomore. He can jump to the NFL after this year. DJ Lagway will be a true sophomore next year at Florida, so he'll have to stay at least another year. But I met DJ Lagway as a recruit, and you just saw the kid's size and his arm, his arm strength and everything. You went, all right, yeah, DJ Lagway, like if this kid lives up to the hype, he's going to be an incredible athlete. But they got him at number 3. He threw for 1,900 passing yards, 12 passing touchdowns last season. He did very well. And obviously Florida finished strong last year, and he was a big reason why. So anyway, that is the top 3. And this is FanDuel's way too early top 10 quarterbacks in college football next season. Garrett Nussmeier at LSU 1, Arch Manning at Texas 2, DJ Lagway at Florida 3. Now they've got Drew Aller at Penn State at number 4. I've had multiple people tell me, like, I just don't see it with Aller. I know Penn State had a nice season. They made the playoff, but they've got him at number 4. And then this is interesting. We got Nico Iamaleava at number 5, Lenore Sellers at number 6. I've had several SEC people tell me last week who've seen this graphic saying, I think those should be flipped. It's very interesting. I was very high on Nico when he committed to Tennessee and the hype around him, and he won that bowl game against Iowa and looked very good, used his legs. But I thought Nico kind of underwhelmed this year at Tennessee. He was very good, don't get me wrong. But like expectations, I thought he would be a little bit better. He threw for 2,600 passing yards, 350 rushing yards, 22 total touchdowns. It was a really nice season. Obviously, Tennessee made the playoff. I mean, that's a great year. Now, the playoff loss was ugly. It was not good, and the offense did not execute. And a big part of that was offensive line, but Nico didn't help himself either. Some of those passes were off target. But Lenore Sellers, as South Carolina finished the season red hot and strong, they did lose the bowl game to Brett Bielema and Illinois. But Lenore Sellers, 2,500 passing yards, 670 rushing yards, and 25 total touchdowns. Again, if you want to flip-flop these, I'm not going to put up an argument. Lenore Sellers, you could put 5, Nico Iamaleava at 6, or keep him how FanDuel had him, Nico at 5, Sellers at 6. Either way, again, those guys we saw, like as opposed to Arch Manning and DJ Lagway, we saw a huge sample size of both those guys, right? I mean, it was full seasons as starters for both Nico and Sellers. But, the sky still seems to be the limit for both of those guys. And if either of them take a huge leap this year, Tennessee could very well be back in the playoff conversation again. At South Carolina, they were so close, the 3 losses. And I think a lot of people still say if Lenore Sellers doesn't get hurt in that LSU game, they probably win that one. Maybe they go 10-2 and South Carolina is probably a playoff team. But either way, those are kind of the, generally thought of 5 of the top 6 quarterbacks in his FanDuel ranking as your top 10 quarterbacks of college football next season, all from the SEC. Nussmeier, Manning, Lagway, Iamaleava, and Sellers. The rest of their top 10 from outside the SEC, Cade Klubnik at Clemson at number 7. And how about number 8? Carson Beck from Miami at number 8. So the former Georgia quarterback. And it's weird too, right? Like this past year going into this past season, Carson Beck was way up this list. Carson Beck was like top 2, top 3 on a list like this at Georgia. He flips to Miami and suddenly, like, I guess just the expectation of him drops. And I'm curious why, right? Like, seems like he'll be playing maybe some easier competition in the ACC at Miami. Probably going to have a better chance to put up some bigger numbers. But anyway, they got Carson Beck at number 8. And then it's Dylan Raiola at number 9 at Nebraska. And then Caden Salter, the former Tennessee quarterback who was at Liberty, transferred this offseason to Colorado to go play for Dion, and he will replace Shador there in that Colorado offense. So, again, a lot of good quarterbacks on this list, and it just got me thinking about expectations for other quarterbacks when, in the SEC this year. And this is what's interesting. If we're just talking production, got what guys put on the field and in the stat book this past offseason in the SEC. Garrett Nussmeier leads everybody coming back in terms of what he did on the field last year. 4,000 passing yards, 32 total touchdowns. But if you want to go production-wise, who's the next best? One of them's a newcomer. How about John Mateer at Oklahoma, who comes over from Washington State? And obviously his OC at Washington State is going over to Oklahoma. So you wonder if he can redo what he just did this past season. But John Mateer, 3,100 passing yards, 29 passing touchdowns, 800 rushing yards and 15 rushing touchdowns. I didn't watch enough Washington State games this year to be familiar with John Mateer, but going back and watching some of his highlights, this kid is a do-it-all. He's a dual threat, and might be what Oklahoma fans were hoping Jackson Arnold was supposed to be this past year. But John Mateer, that's almost 4,000 total production yards, and what is that? 34 touchdowns total. I'm sorry, 44 touchdowns total going into from last season going into Oklahoma. He might actually have some pass catchers. I know a lot of those wide receivers at Oklahoma were hurt, but they're picking up some guys in the transfer portal. We'll see. But John Mateer, maybe a name we're not talking enough about in going over to Oklahoma. And then the other one, just based off production from last year, is Talon Green. And again, like we've had Talon Green on the show last year. I was excited about the possibility of what he was going to be able to do in the Bobby Petrino offense, and he was pretty good. I don't know if I'd call it great, but he was pretty good. 3,100 passing yards, 600 rushing yards, and 23 total touchdowns. He's another one that if he takes that leap in production this year and another year in that Bobby Petrino system and feels more comfortable, again, they're going to have that balanced run game. Jaquindon Jackson helped them a lot this year on the ground. But Talon Green, maybe one to keep an eye on. So we're going off of who's your top 5 quarterbacks in the SEC going into next year? Again, the easiest ones to throw out there are Nussmeier, Lagway, Manning, Sellers, and Iam Aliava. But the ones that may be under the radar, I've got Talon Green and John Mateer in that category. And then we get into what is Jackson Arnold going to look like at Auburn? I know he only threw 1,400 passing yards, 400 rushing yards last year at Oklahoma, but he now goes to Auburn, where he's going to have stud pass catchers. He did, all the wide receiver injuries at Oklahoma, he's going to have some stud pass catchers led by Cam Coleman and Singleton coming over from Georgia Tech. I mean, they're going to have a stud bevy of receivers to pass catch. Now, as the offensive line improve, or they pass blocking, run blocking, all that, that'll be one to watch. But Jackson Arnold, certainly potential for him to blow up and have a big year. Mizzou, Bo Perbula, they move on. Brady Cook is done and moving on. Bo Perbula comes over from Penn State, 200 passing yards, 200 rushing yards, 5 passing touchdowns, 4 rushing touchdowns in mop-up duty last year. Pretty good dual threat. Be curious to see what he does in that Eli Drinkwitz system. The one we can't forget about, Diego Pavia is back at Vanderbilt. 2,200 passing yards, 800 rushing yards last year, 28 total touchdowns. If Pavia gets better next year, and Eli Stowers is back for him at the tight end / wide receiver hybrid guy, they could do some damage together again. So Diego Pavia, again, one to keep an eye on. And then we get into this category of the rest of them, right? And this is where, Gunnar Stockton of Georgia. Georgia is willing to bank on Gunnar Stockton. They were willing to let Carson Beck go and leave because they believed that much in Gunnar Stockton. 440 passing yards, just the 1 touchdown he threw in the playoff game last year. But Gunnar Stockton, what is his, stock up on Stockton? All depends on what you believe in. How about Austin Simmons at Ole Miss? That's another one. Our guy, Stephen Willis, host of Locked On Ole Miss, very high on Austin Simmons. Thinks that he could pick up right where he left off, or right where Jackson Dart left off at Ole Miss in that system with Lane Kiffin. Was highly recruited and decided to go there to play for Lane. We know Lane's going to throw it around the field a lot. So Austin Simmons is certainly a guy that can impress. And how about some of the others? Texas A&M, you had Marcel Reed, they're for 1,800 passing yards, 540 rushing yards, 15 touchdown passes, 7 rushing touchdowns from Marcel Reed last year. They also bring in Jacob Zeno from UAB. I've been told, keep an eye on that maybe he could push Marcel Reed. But if it is Marcel Reed, a true dual threat, was very productive last year for A&M and very good. And then how about the rest of the categories? At Kentucky, you've got Zach Calzada coming over, Cutter Boley, the kid who was a true freshman. Calzada's got tons of experience. In fact, he's the most experienced of any quarterback. Now, he didn't put up the production last year, but how about 4 years as a quarterback in college football? 8,600 passing yards, 73 passing touchdowns, and 11 rushing touchdowns. Zach Calzada, if he's a starter at Kentucky, again, the guy's got a lot of skins on the wall. He has started a lot of college games. Could be very, very good. Alabama, certainly going to be one to watch throughout this spring. Ty Simpson is the incumbent. He's waited 4 years to become the starter. Now it's his time. And the true freshman, Keelan Russell, coming in, who's very highly touted and everybody thinks the world of. That's going to be an awesome battle to watch. And then over at Mississippi State, they bring in Luke Kromenhoek from Florida State, but Blake Shapen is back. And Blake Shapen's another one who started at Baylor, 4 years as a starting quarterback, 6,500 passing yards, 44 passing touchdowns. Does Blake Shapen elevate Mississippi State as a full-time starter? And do they play spoiler and win some SEC games this year? So that's kind of just a look at the landscape of the quarterbacks in the SEC next year. But certainly, one to keep an eye on what is this landscape going to look like in terms of which of these guys lives up to their potential versus the guys who have the skins on the wall and have done it and proven it. All right. Thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. More of early look at 2025 of the SEC and college football coming up next. But first, I want to remind you guys, this message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions in winnings. Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports, whether it's in the playoffs or regular season. Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all of the football action. Right now, it is playoff time. There's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. And here's how it works. You simply pick more or less on at least two players. And if your pick hits, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yes, that's right. 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. Again, super easy. We talked about it last week. Travis Kelce, if you liked him more or less than 70 receiving yards, you can get in on that. If you're ready to run your game this football season and throughout these playoffs, download the Prize Picks app today and use our code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. It is Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, run along here, Locked On SEC. Thank you guys for making us your first listen every day. Shout out to everydayers. Keep coming back and checking us out each and every day. All right, to put a little cap on the top quarterback talk heading in the SEC heading into next year, how about a look at the early Heisman odds? And again, this is courtesy of our friends at FanDuel. They have got Garrett Nussmeier, and a lot of these are SEC guys, but Garrett Nussmeier at plus 850, Arch Manning at plus 850. I think both of those are worth a couple shekel bets and just kind of, keep an eye on what those guys do this year. From the SEC, still, you got Nico Iamaleava at plus 1,200. Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State at plus 1,200 seems like a really good bet with the season he just had at Ohio State as a true freshman. But that's outside the SEC. Lenore Sellers at plus 1,800. Carson Beck, now Miami, plus 2,000. The former Alabama commit quarterback Julian Sayin, they expect him to be the starter at Ohio State. They got him at plus 1,800. John Mateer, now at Oklahoma, plus 2,500. He's tied with DJ Lagway, also at plus 2,500 odds. And then Austin Simmons, the long shot from Ole Miss, at plus 3,300. How about Austin Simmons? If you guys missed it, after the championship game the other night, he had a picture on his Instagram of Ohio State winning it all and said, what did he say? He tweeted something to the effect of like, that will be us, mark my words. Now, he didn't say next year, but he did say that, we're going to win a championship at Ole Miss. So something interesting to keep an eye on there. Gunnar Stockton, they got a plus 3,300. Marcel Reed at plus 4,000. And how about a plus 3,500? Ryan Williams at Alabama. You would talk about Jeremiah Smith at Ohio State. What Ryan Williams just did as a true freshman in Alabama, I don't know how many times you heard all year. This kid's only 17. Ryan Williams, that might be a worthy of good value pick at plus 3,500 because, I don't know, whoever the quarterback is, Keelan Russell or Ty Simpson, they're going to put the ball into Ryan Williams' hands a ton. And if he breaks free and makes some of the explosive plays he made this year at Alabama, the sky is the limit for that kid. So that will bring us to the next graphic I wanted to get to. And this is courtesy of ESPN. This is your way too early college football top 25. And kind of interesting, some of the names on this list and some of the names not on this list. And so let's just kind of take a look at it. They put the reigning national champs Ohio State at number 1. They put the Texas Longhorns at number 2. They are getting the benefit of the doubt because of Arch Manning. Texas is losing a ton, by the way, a ton to the draft, a ton of senior leadership and guys that are moving on that they got to replace. Now, they've recruited very well. Ask any Longhorn fan, they think, look, we're not going to rebuild, we're reloading. But again, there are questions about Texas. Who's going to be this guy? Who's going to be that guy? The running backfield should be good. And again, if the offensive line, the guys who backed up the big studs there that are moving on, If they can play very well, then yeah, Texas is going to be right there in that conversation. They got Penn State 3, Notre Dame 4, Georgia 5. Again, this is a lot of based off of who just made the playoff, but they're expecting Georgia to be right back in that conversation. Now, elsewhere from the SEC, they've got LSU at number 8. I think that's going to be a theme of this offseason. I think a lot of people are expecting the pressure on Brian Kelly now, right? And he's hearing it. He's hearing it already. Marcus Freeman has surpassed you, or Marcus Freeman is doing things you didn't do there, Brian Kelly, at Notre Dame. I think he's feeling it going, and of course the quote lives on. When he left Notre Dame for LSU, his quote was, "I'm going to LSU because it gives me my best chance to win a national championship." Okay, it's put up or shut up time going into, was it year 4 for Brian Kelly? It's put up or shut up time for him. And then outside of that, South Carolina at number 10. I love that. Shane Beamer and the Gamecocks, expectations raised with Lenore Sellers back. Dylan Stewart, your stud, freshman pass rusher who's back for his sophomore year. So expectations raised for South Carolina. But interesting, they got Texas, Georgia, LSU, South Carolina, all as preseason top 20. Again, this is ESPN way too early college football top 25. This isn't probably what it's going to look like come August, but it's a nice little primer to get the kind of thought bubble going of what is this going to look like. Alabama at 12 seems very, like when's the last time Alabama started not preseason top 10? Some doubters kind of looking at Kalen DeBoer saying, look, we like you, but, same kind of thing. Put up or shut up time. You've got to elevate this team this year. You've got to see some of what that guy did at Washington and not a 4-loss season at Alabama where they think that's basically unacceptable. How about the Florida Gators? You talk about Billy Napier being on the hot seat last year to not only saving his job, but now potentially a top 20 preseason team. They got them at 18 because of DJ Lagway. Nico Iamaleava in Tennessee, they've got it 19. Does that seem kind of low for Josh Heupel's group? I know, look, it was a disappointing playoff loss, but they still went, was it 10-2 to get to the playoff? That was still a really good Tennessee team. And if that defense is still really good, I think that might feel a little low for Tennessee at 19. And then they've got Texas A&M at number 22 and Ole Miss at 25. I think it's a little disrespectful for Ole Miss. I think a lot of that is circled around. They wonder, is Austin Simmons going to be what Jackson Dart just was? Ole Miss was just loaded, but they lose some pieces from that team last year, particularly on defense. You lose a Walter Nolan, you lose Chris Paul, you lose a lot of these big pieces that you had. But maybe a little bit disrespectful to put Ole Miss that low. I would probably have Ole Miss in my preseason top 20 right now, not all the way down at 25. I think that's a good spot for A&M, right? They started the season so strong in SEC play and then kind of fizzled down the backstretch of the season. But I think Mike Elko's a good coach. He's recruited well. He's doing well in the transfer portal. I think 22 is probably a good starting point for A&M. If you want to argue for them a spot or two higher, I'll hear that out. But nonetheless, that's where they've got their way too early college football top 25. Some people have thrown in there Auburn. Should Auburn be considered in the mix because of Jackson Arnold and all the hype that they've got? Our buddy Chris Marler's brought up. I think they were among the top 2 in the country in yards per play last year. They just turned the ball over at inopportune times and didn't capitalize. But Auburn was still very productive, even with Peyton Thorne at quarterback. I think they'll get a little bit more stability there with Jackson Arnold and surrounding Jackson Arnold with a lot of weapons. But, maybe a little disrespectful too to take Mizzou out of here after back-to-back 10-win seasons for Eli Drinkwitz. Should they be right here in this conversation? And, I don't know, man, call me crazy, but Vanderbilt, I think should be right there in that 25-26 conversation with Diego Pavia back. Should Vanderbilt be, getting some love for some, preseason rankings here. So maybe even Oklahoma. Again, it was not a good year last year. Was it 6 wins? I think the bowl loss finished 6-7. But this John Mateer guy, I mean, if you're buying all the hype of what John Mateer is going to be coming over from Washington State with Ben Arbuckle as new OC, Oklahoma's going to score some points next year. Schedule's brutal, but I can certainly hear an argument for them in the way too early top 25. All right, still more to come here on Locked On SEC, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. First, I want to remind you guys about our friends at Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge, and that is where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace, the leading virtual therapy provider, makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. With Talkspace, signing up is simple. You can match with a licensed therapist who fits your needs, usually within 48 hours, and it's convenient. You can have sessions from the comfort of your home and even message your therapist between appointments. Plus, Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there is a $0 copay. It's never been easier to prioritize mental health. As a listener to this podcast, you will get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege and you enter our promo code SPACE80. Again, to match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, enter promo code SPACE80, get $80 off your first month, and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnCollege, promo code SPACE80. All right, continue on here, Locked On SEC, as we, before we close out today's show, did want to get to one more off-season graphic here. We've been talking about a lot of the FanDuel odds and ESPN's way too early top 25. So let's take one more look at a FanDuel graphic where they put out the very early championship odds for 2025, the odds to win the national championship this coming season. And they've got the reigning national champs, Ohio State Buckeyes, at plus 450. Texas is sitting behind them at plus 650, tied with Oregon. So Texas is your highest, highest expected national championship odds for to win the national championship from the SEC. I wonder if that will translate. We'll see by the time we get to summer and SEC media days. But will Texas be the prohibitive favorite to win the SEC this year? Certainly something to keep an eye on. Behind them, they got Georgia at plus 700. Now, that's what's funny is Georgia went 2-0 against Texas last year. Kirby versus Sark. Kirby held that head-to-head, and, now Texas loses Quinn Ewers. Georgia loses Carson Beck. So what will that look like with Gunnar Stockton versus Arch Manning? The other SEC teams in here, they've got Alabama plus 1,600. I think that is just simply the Bama brand. I don't think there's any real thought in there about Kalen DeBoer or anything. I think that's just Bama's Bama, and they're going to be in the conversation, and people are going to put money on them, right? I mean, odds to win the national championship. And, do you think this is a big season for DeBoer too, right? Like the Alabama standard. Do they get back to 10-2 at minimum, make the playoff, and make a run at championship? Because if not, you're going the wrong way. And Kalen DeBoer, hot seat conversation will start up. So Alabama plus 1,600, right behind them, Tennessee at plus 1,800. I think that's good value for Heupel and his crew. Right, like I said, if Nico Iamaleava takes that, leap this year, LSU plus 2,000 is good value if you believe that Nussmeier and the rest of that crew, what they've built through the transfer portal, right? Nick Anderson coming over from Oklahoma, Barian Brown coming over from Kentucky. They got Caden Durham back at running back. LSU's got a lot of sneaky good pieces, so plus 2,000 may be good value there. If you're buying into the Austin Simmons hype, Ole Miss plus 2,300 to win the national championship. Again, this is at FanDuel. Texas A&M plus 3,100. Mike Elko started off very strong. South Carolina plus 4,000. Kind of interesting, in those preseason rankings, the way too early ones for ESPN, they have South Carolina as a preseason top 10 team. But if you're looking at FanDuel, the odds makers, they got South Carolina behind Ole Miss, behind Texas A&M. So kind of interesting there. Do you think Carson Beck elevates Miami? They got them at plus 4,000. And then here's where you get some really good value. How about Florida plus 5,000? My only hesitancy here would be the schedule is absolutely brutal for Florida. So, TJ Lagway, I like him a lot. I believe in him, but that schedule is if they had, say, Texas's schedule, I'd be all over Florida plus that 5,000. How about Auburn at plus 5,000? FanDuel is buying into the Jackson Arnold hype, and with what Hugh Freeze has done there, and I think it was funny as our buddy Zach Blockerby kind of said about Hugh Freeze. He's like, my only question with Hugh Freeze is, or with Alabama, is coaching. Like, you look at what they've been able to do and have, top recruiting classes and top portal classes. Here's what Zach said: two top 7 recruiting classes, 2 top 3 portal classes. The coaching is my concern. That's what Zach said. Look, I like Hugh Freeze a lot, but we talk about some other guys put up or shut up time. It is put up or shut up time for Hugh Freeze at Auburn. If they do not take a massive leap forward we could be talking about the start of the end for Hugh Freeze there in the Plains. And then lastly on here, they squeezed in Oklahoma plus 6,500, right? Back to the John Mateer, Ben Arbuckle conversation. If you like the Sooners to bounce back in a big way this year, might be worth some good value there. All right, thank you guys for making Locked On SEC your first listen every day. For your second listen, check out Locked On College Football with their buddy Spencer McLaughlin, doing a good job talking to all the big topics in college football. I'm Chris Gordy. You guys have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow. Might have a very special guest, some sound bites joining him on tomorrow's show from the SEC. You don't want to miss that. It's Locked On SEC. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow.